Welcome to Dead Air Confessions. Late at night, when the streets are empty and the signal begins to fade, people start sharing the things they never say out loud. The strange call they received, the person they saw standing outside, the night they realized they were not alone. Tonight, you will hear stories from people who carried those memories for years. Before we go on air, leave a comment and tell me where you are listening from tonight. And if you enjoy true scary stories with a quiet, late-night feel, subscribe to Dead Air Confessions. Turn the volume down low. The line is open. When you are awake from dusk until dawn for decades, you are bound to see and hear things that do not make immediate sense. I have spent a large part of my life awake during the hours when most people are asleep. Long nights change the way you notice the world. You hear sounds that get lost during the day. You see shapes moving at the edge of your vision. You watch headlights pass through empty streets, hear animals outside when nobody else is around, and catch strange flashes of movement in windows, hallways, fields, and dark corners. Over the years, I have seen and heard all kinds of weird things. Some of them were probably animals. Some were likely people doing normal things at strange hours. Some were sounds carrying farther than they should have because the night was quiet. Some were probably my own tired brain filling in gaps, turning a shadow into a figure or a distant sound into a voice. That is the thing about being awake at night for a long time. You learn that darkness does not necessarily make things supernatural. It just takes away information you cannot see as well. You cannot hear where every sound is coming from. Your mind starts working with partial details and tries to build a complete picture. Usually, the picture is wrong. I have always leaned toward logical explanations. Even when something feels strange, my brain fights against the idea that it could be paranormal. I do not like jumping to ghosts, demons, spirits, or anything else supernatural. I want there to be a real answer, even if I do not know what it is right away. A sound in the woods is probably an animal. A strange figure outside is probably a person, a tree, or a trick of the light. A noise in a house is probably the pipes, wind, shifting wood, or something mechanical. I do not think that makes me closed-minded. I just think the world is already strange enough without adding supernatural explanations to every unexplained moment. But there is one story my mom has told for years that has always stayed with me. It is not because I fully believe it was supernatural. It is because of her. My mom is not known for lying. She is not someone who tells wild stories to get attention. She does not have a long list of ghost encounters. She does not claim to see things other people cannot. She has not spent her life looking for paranormal experiences or trying to convince everyone around her that the world is haunted. As far as I know, this was the only thing like this that ever happened to her. That is why it always felt different when she told the story. She said that when she was a preteen, she saw the literal devil sitting on her grandparents' front porch. Not something that vaguely looked strange. Not a shadow. Not a person in a costume. Not an animal that she confused with something else. She said she saw the devil, horns and all. Her grandparents lived on flat farmland. It was the kind of property where you could see for a long distance in every direction. There were no thick woods close to the house, no crowded neighborhood, no nearby buildings where someone could disappear behind a fence or duck around a corner. The land was open, fields stretched out around the house, and the horizon was wide. If someone walked across the property during the day, you could see them from far away. If a person ran away from the porch, there were not many places to hide. You would see them crossing the yard, heading toward the road, moving through the field, or going toward the barn. There were only a few structures on the property: the farmhouse, the barn, and the family vehicles. That was basically it. The house itself was an old country home. I can picture it from the way my mom described it over the years, even though I was not there when this happened. It had a front porch where people sat in the evenings. The porch faced out over the open land. There were probably steps leading down into a yard that blended into the fields around it. It was the kind of place where you could hear someone arriving long before they reached the house. A car driving down the road would be visible in the distance. A stranger walking up the driveway would stand out immediately. Even animals could be seen from far away if they crossed the open land. There was nowhere for something large to hide close to the porch. That was what made the story unsettling. My mom was still young at the time, maybe 11 or 12, somewhere around that age. She was old enough to remember the moment clearly, but young enough that fear could take over quickly when something did not make sense. I do not know exactly what she had been doing before she looked outside. Maybe she was walking through the house. Maybe she was looking out the front window. Maybe she had gone toward the front door for some ordinary reason. The details before the sighting have changed slightly in different versions of the story, as memories often do over the years. But the main part never changed. She saw something on the front porch. At first, I imagine she probably did not understand what she was looking at. When you see something unexpected, your brain does not always process it right away. It tries to fit the image into something familiar. A coat hanging over a chair becomes a person for half a second. A tree stump becomes an animal. A person standing in bad light can look strange until you focus on them. But according to my mom, she looked at the figure for several seconds. It was not a quick glance. It was not a shadow that vanished before she could focus. She said she stood there and stared. The figure was on the porch. It had the shape of a person, but it did not look like anybody she knew. It had horns. That was the part she always emphasized. Horns rising from its head, clear enough that she did not think she was looking at a hat, branches, or some odd shape behind a person. She said it looked like the devil from the kind of picture a child might see in a religious book, a Halloween image, or an old illustration. A human-like figure, dark, with horns, standing or sitting on the porch, close enough to the house that she could see it clearly. She did not describe it as moving toward her. It did not speak. It did not knock. It did not make a sound. It was simply there. That silence is what makes the story creepier to me. If it had yelled, rattled the door, or done something obvious, there might be a clearer explanation. Maybe it could have been a prank. Maybe a person in a costume had been trying to scare someone. Maybe there would have been a reason for it to be there. But my mom always described it as still, quiet, watching. She said she looked at it for a few seconds in complete horror. For a child, a few seconds can feel like a long time. When you are frightened, time stretches. You notice details you would usually miss. You notice the shape of something's head, the way it stands, the color around it, how close it is, and the feeling in your body while you are trying to decide whether what you are seeing is real. She said she froze. Then she covered her eyes. That part has always felt very human to me. She did not calmly study it. She did not walk closer. She did not call out and ask who it was. She was terrified, and she reacted like a scared child. She covered her eyes because she did not want to see it anymore. For a moment, she stood there with her hands over her face. Then she screamed, and she ran toward the front door. I can imagine the sound of her feet hitting the floor, the panic in her voice, and the rush of adrenaline that makes you move before you even know what you are doing. She was not thinking about whether she looked foolish. She was not wondering whether people would believe her. She only knew that something horrible was on the porch and that she wanted to get away from it. As she ran toward the door, she glanced back. The figure was gone, not walking across the yard, not moving away from the porch, not standing at the edge of the driveway. Gone. That was the part that scared her father. At least, that is how I understand it. My mom's dad came out to see what was wrong. He had heard her scream and run inside. He probably thought she had seen an animal, a stranger, or something dangerous near the house. On a farm, you take things seriously when a child says someone is outside, especially if they are terrified. He went to look. The porch was empty. The yard was empty. The fields were empty. There was no person running away. There was no car pulling away from the property. There was no animal in the distance. There was nothing. My mom told him what she had seen. She said there was a figure on the porch. She said it had horns. She said it was the devil. I do not know whether her father believed that exact explanation. I doubt he did. Most adults would probably assume that a child had seen something strange and become frightened. He may have thought she had mistaken a shadow for a person, or seen an animal at an angle that made it look bizarre, but he did not dismiss her without looking. He searched the property. First, he checked around the house, the porch, the side of the house, the area around the front steps, the yard. There was nobody there. Then, he checked the barn. The barn was the only other building on the property. If someone had been playing a prank, hiding, or trying to scare her, the barn would have been the most obvious place to go. He searched it. Nothing. He checked the vehicles. There were only 2 of them. Maybe he looked under them, inside them, around them, or checked whether someone could be hiding nearby. Again, there was nothing. The land was flat enough that there was no easy way for someone to disappear. That was the part my mom always returned to when she told the story. There were no woods right beside the porch, no thick bushes, no row of nearby houses, no alley, no back gate leading to a hidden street. There was open farmland in nearly every direction. If a person had been on the porch and suddenly run away, someone should have seen them. Her dad should have seen them crossing the yard, or heading for the barn, or reaching one of the vehicles, or moving into the fields. But he found no one. That does not prove anything supernatural. I know that. A person can hide surprisingly well. A child can be mistaken. A dark shape can be misread. A shadow can look more solid than it really is. A person in a hat, a farm worker, or someone wearing dark clothing might have looked terrifying in the wrong light. There are many possibilities. Maybe it was a person who got away before her father came outside. Maybe it was someone walking through the property who ducked behind the house or into a place her father did not check. Maybe she saw an object on the porch that looked human for a few seconds before the angle or light changed. Maybe her mind filled in the horns because she was young and already afraid. Maybe it was a nightmare-like memory that became more vivid as she repeated it over the years. All of those explanations are possible, but there are details that make me pause. My mom did not tell the story like someone who enjoyed being scared. She did not tell it with dramatic pauses or a smile, waiting for a reaction. She told it like something that genuinely frightened her. And it was the only story like that she had. She was not a person who constantly saw shadows, heard voices, or claimed strange things happened to her. She did not say the house was haunted. She did not say the farm had demons. She did not connect it to a long list of other supernatural experiences. It was one event, one sighting, one terrifying moment on her grandparents' porch, then nothing else. That makes it harder for me to brush off completely, even though I still do not believe the literal devil was sitting outside. I have heard the story enough times that I can almost see it. A bright open farm, a house sitting alone against wide fields, a child looking toward the porch, A dark horned figure standing where no one should be. Then a scream. Then an adult searching the open property and finding nothing. There is something very lonely about the setting. In a city, someone can disappear around a corner. In a neighborhood, someone can walk between houses or slip behind a fence. In a forest, someone can vanish into the trees. But on flat farmland, the emptiness itself becomes frightening. You can see too far. There is nowhere obvious for someone to go. The open land should make you feel safe because you can see danger coming. But if something appears close to the house and then vanishes without leaving a trace, that same openness becomes unsettling. It makes you wonder whether you really saw it at all, or whether it was there in a way you cannot explain. I have never asked my mom too many questions about it because I do not want to push her into turning an old memory into something bigger than it was. Sometimes the more people examine a frightening childhood memory, the more details get added without anyone meaning to add them. Memory is not a recording. It changes. It shifts. You remember the feeling first, then the image, then the story you have told yourself about the image for years. A moment that lasted seconds can become something you replay so often that it feels longer and sharper than it really was. I know that. I have spent enough late nights awake to understand how easily the mind can make sense out of nonsense. When you are tired, a jacket on a chair can become a person. When you are anxious, a sound outside can become a voice. When you are scared, your brain does not say, "I do not have enough information." It says, "Something is wrong." That instinct keeps people alive. But it also makes us see things that are not there. Still, there is a difference between a brief, strange sight and a memory that sticks with someone for decades. My mom did not say she saw something vaguely frightening. She said she saw horns. She said she stared at it. She said she covered her eyes because she could not bear to keep looking. She said that when she looked again, it was gone. And she said her father searched everywhere he reasonably could and found nothing. That is why the story has always felt strange to me. Not because I think it proves the supernatural is real. It does not. There is no photograph, no second witness, no physical evidence, no way to go back and check what was on that porch all those years ago. But it is a story that does not fit neatly into the logical explanations I usually rely on. Maybe that is why I remember it so clearly. I have been awake through enough strange nights to know that unexplained does not mean paranormal. It only means unexplained. Most things that feel strange eventually have ordinary reasons. You hear the explanation later, or you notice a detail you missed, and the mystery disappears. But some things never get that ending. They remain one clear, frightening memory from someone you trust. A memory with no proof, no answer, no second event to compare it to. Just a child standing inside a farmhouse, looking out at a horned figure on the porch, screaming and running for help. Then an adult stepping outside into open farmland and finding nothing there at all. I do not know what my mom saw. I probably never will. Maybe it was a trick of the light. Maybe it was a person she misunderstood. Maybe it was an object that looked like something terrible for only a few seconds. Maybe fear changed what she remembered. Or maybe she saw something that did not have a simple explanation. My brain still refuses to let me believe the supernatural is real. But every time my mom tells that story, there is a small part of me that remembers how honest she sounds. And that part of me cannot help wondering what, exactly, was standing on that porch. I was walking along a mountain trail at night in complete darkness. Not regular nighttime darkness, where you can still see the shape of the trees, the edge of the trail, or the faint glow of the sky above you. This was the kind of darkness that makes you feel like the world has disappeared beyond the reach of your own body. There was no moon out that night. The stars were not visible either. I do not know if there were clouds overhead or if the trees were simply blocking the sky, but I could not see anything above me. The darkness felt solid. It filled the woods, the hills, and every part of the trail beyond the beam of my flashlight. I had a very bright flashlight with me, and normally it would have been enough to make me feel safe. A good flashlight can cut through a dark trail, show you rocks, roots, branches, and anything else directly in front of you. But that night, even with the light on, I could only see a small section of the path ahead, maybe 2 feet at a time. That was it. The flashlight beam created a narrow, bright patch on the ground directly in front of me, and everything outside that small circle was black. I could see dirt, gravel, fallen leaves, and pieces of the trail as I stepped forward. I could see where I was placing my feet, but I could not see far enough ahead to know what was waiting around the next bend. I could not see the trees clearly. I could not see the slope of the mountain. I could not see the drop-offs, the bushes, the rocks, or the road beyond the trail. The light would hit whatever was immediately in front of me, and the rest of the world seemed to vanish. Normally, walking on a mountain trail at night is not completely silent. Even if there is no wind, there are usually sounds. You hear insects. You hear leaves settling. You hear a branch creak somewhere in the distance. Maybe an animal moves through the brush. Maybe water runs down a slope or through a small stream. You hear your own footsteps, your breathing, your clothes moving as you walk. But that night, for some reason, everything was quiet. Not peaceful quiet, wrong quiet. There was no wind moving through the trees. The branches were still. The leaves were still. The grass beside the trail was still. I could not hear insects, birds, animals, or anything moving around in the forest. The only real sound was my own movement, my footsteps on the trail, the soft crunch of gravel or dirt under my shoes, my breathing, the faint sound of my clothing shifting as I walked. Every time I stepped forward, I became more aware of how alone I was. I was not necessarily afraid at the beginning. I had been walking for a while already. I knew the trail. I knew where I was headed. I had a flashlight, and I had a destination waiting at the end. It was not like I had wandered off into the mountains without any idea where I was going. Still, the darkness made it difficult not to think about what might be around me. When you are walking in the woods at night, your imagination starts working against you. Every dark shape beyond the flashlight beam could be a tree, a rock, or a bush. But your mind does not always settle on the harmless answer. It starts to imagine animals standing just outside the light. It imagines someone watching from behind a tree. It imagines movement in the brush that you cannot see. The trail felt narrower than it probably was. The mountain felt larger than it did during the day, and the silence made every step feel louder. I kept moving because stopping seemed worse. At least while I was walking, I had something to focus on. I could watch the path. I could keep the flashlight aimed downward. I could count my steps without meaning to. I could think about how much farther I had to go and tell myself that I would reach my destination soon. But every now and then, I would turn the flashlight slightly to one side. I would shine it toward the trees. The beam would hit trunks, branches, rocks, or tall grass, then disappear into darkness beyond them. The forest did not look alive. It looked empty. That should have made me feel better, but it did not. The woods were too quiet. There was no sign of anything. No eyes reflecting in the light, no movement in the brush, no sound of an animal running away. Nothing. It felt like the entire mountain had stopped. I do not remember exactly how long I had been walking before I reached the lamppost. It had been long enough that my legs were starting to feel tired, and I was ready for even a small break. The trail had stretched on through darkness for what felt like much longer than it probably was. Then I saw a weak glow ahead. At first I thought it might have been another person with a flashlight. A distant light in the mountains at night can mean anything. It could be someone walking, someone camping, a car far away, or light reflecting off a sign. But as I got closer, I realized it was a lamppost. It stood beside the trail in an area where the path widened slightly. It was strange to see a lamppost out there because the rest of the trail had been completely dark. It was not part of a street or a neighborhood. It was just one old light standing by itself in the middle of the mountain route. I had heard that it marked the location of an old cabin nearby. I do not know much about the cabin. I had only heard that there was once a cabin somewhere near that part of the trail, possibly hidden farther back in the trees or down a side path. Maybe it had belonged to someone who lived on the mountain long ago. Maybe it was abandoned. Maybe it had been torn down years before. I had never seen it myself. The lamppost was supposed to mark the area. That was all I knew. As I got close, the lamp gave off a weak yellowish light. It was not bright enough to light up the whole forest, but compared to the darkness I had been walking through, it felt almost welcoming. It created a small pool of light on the trail and made the immediate area visible. I could finally see more than 2 feet in front of me. I could see the ground around the pole. I could see part of the trail stretching in both directions. I could see the rough shapes of trees nearby. I could see a little bit of the road across from where I was standing. After walking in darkness for so long, the lamppost felt like a place to stop. I stepped beneath it and stood there for a moment. The light above me hummed softly, though I am not sure whether it actually made a sound or whether I only noticed the silence around it. The air was still. The trees were still. Nothing moved. I looked down at my flashlight. I had been holding it tightly for a long time. My hand was tired. The beam had been bouncing in front of me with every step, and I wanted a break from staring into that small circle of light. So I turned it off. The darkness changed immediately. The flashlight had been giving me control, even if it only showed a small part of the trail. When I switched it off, the lamppost became the only source of light. At first, it felt almost easier on my eyes. The yellow light from above spread around me in a softer way than the flashlight. I could see the ground beneath me and a short distance around the pole. Beyond that, however, everything remained black. The trees were only vague, dark shapes. The road across from me was barely visible. The mountain behind the road was gone completely. I stood there under the lamppost and let myself rest for a few seconds. Maybe I was catching my breath. Maybe I was trying to listen for anything in the woods. Maybe I was simply glad not to be walking through darkness for a moment. But the silence did not feel better once I stopped. It felt worse. When I had been walking, I had my own footsteps to fill the quiet. Standing still made the silence more noticeable. There was no wind in the trees, no night insects, no animal calls, no distant traffic, nothing. The mountain seemed to be holding its breath. I remember looking out toward the road across from me. There was not much to see. The lamppost only lit a small patch of ground, and the road beyond it fell quickly into shadow. I could make out the rough line of it, but not much else. Beyond the road were trees and darkness. I do not know why I was looking in that direction. Maybe I felt something without understanding it. Maybe I was simply trying to see farther than the narrow trail had allowed. Maybe I wanted to know whether the old cabin was somewhere across the road. Then the lamp flickered. It was only for a moment. The light above me dimmed, flashed, and came back. But during that flicker, I saw a tall human silhouette standing across the road from me. I saw it clearly enough to know it was shaped like a person. Tall, still, standing on the other side of the road, just beyond the strongest part of the light. It was not close enough for me to see a face. I could not make out clothing, hair, hands, or any details that would tell me who it was. I only saw the shape, a tall, dark human form. For 1 second, it was there. Then the lamp steadied again. The figure was no longer visible. I froze. I did not move. I did not speak. I do not know whether I stopped breathing for a second, but it felt like I did. My first thought was that there had to be a normal explanation. Maybe it was a tree. Maybe it was a post. Maybe it was a branch or a shadow that looked human because the lamp had flickered. Maybe my eyes had adjusted badly after I turned off the flashlight. Maybe the shifting light created a shape that my brain turned into a person. Those explanations all came to me quickly, because that is what your mind does when something impossible looking appears in front of you. It tries to make it ordinary before panic takes over. But the shape had looked too human. It had been standing upright. It had not looked like a tree trunk or a bush. It had not looked like a sign. It had looked like someone standing across the road and watching me. I remember staring into the darkness where I had seen it. The lamp continued glowing above me, but it did not reach far enough to show the other side clearly. The road was there. I could see part of the ground. I could see the edge of the trees, but I could not see enough. That was the worst part. The light had shown me something for 1 brief second, then taken it away. I did not know whether the figure had moved. I did not know whether it had stepped back into the trees. I did not know whether it had been there all along. I did not know whether it was still standing in the darkness, just beyond the edge of the lamp's reach. I reached for my flashlight immediately. My hand felt clumsy because of the adrenaline. I turned it back on and aimed it across the road. The beam cut through the darkness. It hit the ground. It hit the edge of the road. It hit trees and brush. But I did not see anyone. No tall person. No figure standing still. No movement. Nothing. I swept the flashlight back and forth. The beam jumped across the trees. It caught branches, patches of leaves, rough bark, and uneven ground. Every shape looked wrong for a second before the flashlight moved on. But I did not see the silhouette again. That should have made me feel better. It did not. In some ways, it made it worse. If I had seen someone, I could have reacted. I could have called out. I could have moved away. I could have understood that there was a real person on the trail. But the flashlight showed nothing. The shape had been there during the flicker. Then it was gone. I did not wait around to figure it out. I started walking again. At first I walked quickly. Then I began to run. The last 2 miles to my destination were some of the longest miles I can remember. I kept the flashlight on the entire time. I did not turn it off again. I did not stop. I did not look behind me unless I absolutely had to. The trail ahead of me was still only visible in that narrow 2-foot beam, but now every dark patch outside the light felt dangerous. I kept imagining the tall figure somewhere behind me, standing in the road, stepping onto the trail, or following just far enough back that I could not hear it. The silence continued. That was almost worse than hearing footsteps. If I had heard someone behind me, I would have known something was there. I could have run faster, called someone, or tried to prepare myself. But I heard nothing. No footsteps, no branches breaking, no breathing, no voice, no animal moving through the woods. Just my own feet striking the trail again and again. I ran until my lungs hurt. I ran even when the path became uneven. I ran while trying not to trip over rocks, roots, or loose dirt. I kept the flashlight angled down enough to see where I was stepping, but every few seconds I raised it and scanned farther ahead. I did not want to run into someone or something waiting on the trail. I remember feeling ridiculous and terrified at the same time. Part of me kept saying that I had seen a shadow. A flickering light can make anything look strange. The woods at night can play tricks on you. I was tired. I had been walking alone. I had spent too long staring into darkness. Maybe I had scared myself. But another part of me kept remembering the shape. Tall, human, standing across the road. I could not stop seeing it. Every time the flashlight beam moved over a tree, I thought it might be the figure again. Every time I passed a dark opening between trees, I imagined someone standing just outside the light. Every time the path curved, I felt afraid that I would see a silhouette waiting ahead. I did not. Nothing else happened during those 2 miles. No lamp flickered again. No person stepped out. No voice called to me. No one followed me into the light. But I did not relax until I reached my destination. When I finally got there, I remember turning around and looking back toward the trail. The darkness swallowed it almost immediately. The mountain path behind me looked like nothing more than a black opening between trees. There was no sign of the lamppost from where I stood. No sign of the road. No sign of the old cabin area. Just darkness. I do not know what I saw that night. Maybe it was a real person. That possibility is honestly more frightening than the supernatural one. Someone could have been standing by the road near an old cabin, watching people pass. Maybe they stepped behind a tree when I turned the flashlight back on. Maybe the terrain gave them a way to move out of sight quickly. Maybe they were a hiker, a local, or someone who did not want to be seen. Maybe it was only a shadow. The lamp post flickered. The light changed. My eyes had been focused on a flashlight beam for a long time, then suddenly adjusted to the dim yellow glow of the lamp. A tree branch, a signpost, or a patch of brush could have looked like a person for one brief moment. That is probably the most logical answer. But the reason I still remember it is because the silhouette did not feel vague. It did not feel like a random shape my mind invented after I was already scared. It looked tall. It looked human. And it looked as though it was standing completely still across the road from me. I think about the silence, too. The trail was not quiet in a peaceful way. It was quiet in a way that made the darkness feel aware. There was no wind, no insects, no animal sounds, no rustling. It was like everything around me had stopped moving before I reached the lamp post. Maybe that was normal for the mountain at that time of night. Maybe the weather had changed. Maybe I was too focused on my own breathing and footsteps to notice anything else. But it made the moment under the lamp feel even stranger. I had been walking through complete darkness, seeing only 2 feet of trail at a time. Then I reached the one place with light, the one place where I stopped to rest, the one place I turned off my flashlight, and that was where I saw the silhouette. Ever since then, I have thought differently about lights in isolated places. A lamppost in the middle of nowhere should make you feel safer. It should feel like a landmark, a sign that someone has been there before, something that breaks up the darkness. That night, it did the opposite. It gave me just enough light to see something I wish I had not seen. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was a person. Maybe it was a shadow created by a flickering bulb. I will probably never know. But I know that after the light flickered, I did not stand under that lamppost for another second. I turned my flashlight back on, and I ran the last 2 miles through the darkness as fast as I could. I was married and living in a specific house at the time, so I had to have been in my early 20s. My wife and I were sitting on the couch one night, watching a movie with my younger brother. He is 3 years younger than me. and he had come over to hang out with us like he often did back then. It was a normal night at first. Nothing about it felt strange before it happened. We were not telling ghost stories. We were not watching a horror movie. We were not sitting around trying to scare each other. We were just watching something ordinary, probably one of those movies you put on because everyone wants to relax, not because anyone is deeply interested in it. The lights were off because that was how we usually watched movies. The television gave the living room enough light that we could see each other, the couch, the coffee table, and the basic shape of the room. But it was not bright enough to light up the rest of the house. The kitchen was connected to the living room, or at least visible from where we were sitting. It was about 30 feet away from us. During the day, it was a completely normal kitchen. There was nothing especially creepy about it. It had the usual counters, cabinets, appliances, and whatever ordinary clutter people have in their homes. But with the lights off late at night, it looked different. The television light did not reach it properly. It only created faint shadows around the entrance. You could see the doorway and part of the kitchen floor, but beyond that was mostly darkness. The cabinets blended into the walls. The far corners of the room were impossible to make out. Every time the movie changed scenes, the light from the screen shifted, and the kitchen seemed to change shape in the background. My wife and I were sitting on the couch. My brother was sitting on the floor about 6 feet in front of us and slightly to the left. He was close enough that we could talk without raising our voices, but he had his own spot on the floor where he could lean back and watch the television comfortably. The kitchen was in roughly the same direction from all of us, except farther away. My wife and I were facing the television, and my brother was facing it too. The kitchen sat off to the side, somewhere in that darker part of our vision where you can sense movement without looking directly at it. I do not remember exactly what was happening in the movie when it occurred. It was somewhere around the middle. We had already been watching for a while. Everyone was relaxed. There was probably some dialogue coming from the television. Maybe music in the background, maybe a scene that had nothing to do with anything frightening. Then I caught something moving in the kitchen. It was out of the corner of my eye. I did not see a face. I did not see clothes. I did not see enough detail to say it was a person, at least not in the normal way. It was just movement at first, a dark shape shifting inside an already dark room. For a split second, I thought maybe it was my eyes playing tricks on me. That happens when you watch television in a dark room. The screen throws light across the walls, and your peripheral vision starts noticing shadows that are not really there. A change in the movie can make the room behind you look like it is moving. A reflection can shift on the wall. A dark object can seem to move because your eyes are focused somewhere else. But this did not feel like that. The shape was too large. It was tall, and it was crouched down. That was the detail that made my body react before my mind had time to understand what I was seeing. It looked like a tall, shadowy figure standing in the kitchen, but bent low, almost as if it were trying to hide. It was not standing upright like a person waiting in a doorway. It was hunched down or crouched, making itself lower while still looking too tall to be normal. I only caught it in my peripheral vision, so I cannot tell you exactly what it looked like. It could have been a trick of light. It could have been a shape created by the darkness. It could have been something my mind tried to explain as a person, because human brains are built to see faces and bodies in random shadows. But in that moment, it looked like a tall thing crouching in the kitchen. I turned my head toward it. At the exact same time, my brother turned too. That was when I knew he had seen something as well. Neither of us had said anything. There was no warning. I did not point toward the kitchen. I did not ask him if he saw something. We both simply reacted at once, as if the same movement had caught both of our attention. For a second, I remember feeling almost relieved, not because I wanted someone else to see it, but because it meant I had not imagined the movement alone. My brother had noticed something too. He had looked in the same direction at the same time. Then, whatever it was moved. It came toward us unbelievably fast. I do not mean it walked forward. I do not mean it stepped out of the kitchen. It was more like the shadow rushed across the distance between the kitchen and the living room in one sudden movement. The best way I can explain it is that it seemed to stretch or lunge toward us, crossing what felt like 30 feet far too quickly for anything normal. Both my brother and I flinched, not a small reaction. We both jerked back at the same time. It was instinctive, the kind of movement you make when something suddenly comes toward your face. You do not think about it. You do not decide to move. Your body reacts before your brain can understand why. I remember my stomach dropping. I remember the rush of adrenaline. I remember feeling my shoulders tense up like I was about to stand or run. My brother reacted the same way. He was sitting on the floor, and he flinched hard enough that I immediately knew he had seen the movement too. We were not feeding off each other's fear. We were not reacting because one person screamed and the other followed. We both saw something move toward us. Then it was gone. The kitchen was dark again. The living room was the same as it had been a second earlier. The television was still playing. My wife was still sitting on the couch beside me. Nothing had changed except the fact that both my brother and I were suddenly terrified. My wife looked at us and asked what was wrong. I do not remember exactly what either of us said first. We probably both started trying to explain it at once. I may have asked my brother if he saw something in the kitchen. He may have asked me the same thing. The important part was that he had. He had seen something. He had not seen every detail I thought I saw, and I did not know whether he had noticed the same crouched shape exactly the way I had, but he had clearly seen movement in that direction. He had turned toward the kitchen at the same time I did, and he had flinched when whatever it was rushed toward us. My wife had not seen anything. She had been sitting right beside me, but her attention was fixed on the movie. By the time she looked toward the kitchen, there was nothing there. She had no idea why her husband and brother-in-law had both suddenly reacted as though something was coming at them. That made the situation harder to explain. If all three of us had seen it, maybe we could have compared what we saw. If only I had seen it, I could have written it off as my eyes adjusting to the dark. But two people, sitting in different positions, saw movement in the same direction and reacted at the same time. That was what stayed with me. My brother was not sitting right beside me. He was 6 feet away, down on the floor, and slightly to the left. He had a different angle on the room. The kitchen was about 30 feet away from us. We were both focused on the movie. Neither of us had any reason to be staring toward the dark kitchen. And yet we both turned. We both saw something. We both flinched. For a few seconds after it happened, nobody said much. The movie kept playing in the background, but I could not have told you what was happening on the screen. The sound from the television suddenly felt far away. All I could think about was the kitchen. I kept looking toward it. The dark entrance seemed deeper than it had a moment earlier. The room was still there, just as it always was. But it no longer looked ordinary. Every cabinet edge, every shadow from the counter, every dark space near the floor seemed like it could hide the shape we had just seen. I remember trying to convince myself that it was nothing. Maybe the television screen had changed brightness. Maybe a car drove past outside and headlights moved through a window. Maybe one of us shifted and our shadow reflected in the kitchen somehow. Maybe the darkness had created a false sense of movement. There are so many ways the brain can misunderstand things in low light. Your eyes are not designed to give you perfect information when you are looking toward a dim room from a bright screen. peripheral vision is good at sensing motion, but terrible at giving detail. A dark coat hanging on a chair can look like a person. A cabinet door can look like a face. A shadow can appear to move because the light source changes. I knew all of that, but none of it explained the speed. Nothing about the room should have looked as if it moved 30 feet toward us in 1 second. Nothing should have made two people flinch at the same time. My brother and I kept trying to describe it to each other. I told him I saw something tall in the kitchen. I told him it looked crouched down. I remember emphasizing that it was not standing normally. It looked like something tall, trying to stay low. That was the image that had hit me first, before it moved. I do not remember whether he used the same exact words. He may have described it as a dark shape. He may have said he only saw something move. The details may not have matched perfectly because the entire thing happened so fast. But he knew exactly what I was talking about. He was not confused when I asked if he saw something in the kitchen. That alone made the experience feel more real. I think we both stared into the kitchen for a while after that. At some point, one of us probably turned on a light. Maybe my wife did it because she was tired of us looking toward the darkness. Maybe I got up and flipped on the kitchen light myself. I do not remember which one of us moved first, but I do remember how different it felt when the kitchen was lit. There was nothing there. No person, no animal, no intruder, no object that obviously looked like a crouching figure. The counters looked ordinary. The cabinets looked ordinary. The floor was empty. There was nowhere for someone to hide without being seen. We checked the area, looked around corners, and made sure no one had somehow come into the house. Nothing. The house was secure. The doors were locked. There were no open windows. Nobody had come inside. At least, nobody we could find. My wife was probably the most logical one of us that night. She had not seen anything, so she was not dealing with the same adrenaline rush. She may have said we both got spooked by a shadow. She may have laughed a little, not because she thought we were lying, but because the situation sounded ridiculous once the lights were on. But my brother and I were not laughing. We were shaken. The fact that the kitchen looked normal under the lights did not make it better. It made it stranger. In the dark, there had been something, or at least it had felt like there was something. Then in the light, there was nothing at all. That is a hard feeling to explain. You are almost relieved because you do not want there to be an actual person hiding in your house. But then you are left with a different kind of fear. If no one was there, what did you both see? I remember feeling embarrassed by how scared I was. I was a grown man. I was married. My younger brother was there. My wife was sitting beside me. It was not like I was a child alone in a dark room, letting my imagination take over. But fear does not care how old you are. When you see something in the dark that your brain cannot explain, your body reacts the same way it would when you were 10 years old. Your heart pounds. Your skin gets cold. You stop trusting your own eyes. You start listening to every sound in the house. After that, every small noise felt important. The refrigerator turning on sounded louder than it should have. A pipe settling somewhere in the wall made me look toward the kitchen. The house creaked, and I wondered whether it was someone moving around. Even the movie felt wrong after that. The normal music and dialogue on the screen were still there, but they no longer held my attention. Every few seconds, I found myself looking toward the edge of the kitchen instead of watching the television. I was waiting to see the shape again. It never came back. At least not that night. Nothing else happened after the shadow rushed toward us. There was no voice, no door slammed, no object moved. No figure appeared in the hallway. The house did not suddenly fill with strange activity. That was the only event. A few seconds of movement, a tall, crouched shadow in the kitchen, a sudden rush toward us, then nothing. But those few seconds were enough to stay with me. I have thought about whether the darkness could have caused it. Maybe there was a reflection from the television that created a tall shape in the kitchen. Maybe the image on the screen changed, throwing a shadow across the wall that looked like something crouched. Maybe when we turned to look directly at it, the reflection changed again, making it seem as though it moved toward us. That would be the easiest explanation. It is possible. A dark room can turn ordinary things into frightening shapes. Your peripheral vision catches movement before your brain understands what caused it. If two people are watching the same television in the same dark room, they might both notice the same shift in light. But I still do not understand why it looked like it rushed at us. That is the part that always makes the memory feel different from an ordinary shadow. The movement seemed directed. It seemed fast. It seemed like it noticed us looking and came toward us. I know how unreasonable that sounds. I know shadows do not make decisions. I know my memory may have made the movement feel more dramatic over time. The brain tends to hold on to the frightening part of an experience and replay it in sharper detail. But I remember my brother flinching. I remember him jerking back at the same moment I did. And I remember the look on his face afterward. He was scared too. We did not sit there and convince each other we saw something. We did not have time to talk before we reacted. Whatever happened, it happened so quickly that both of us responded before either of us could influence the other. That was why I have never fully been able to shrug it off. If I had been alone, I would probably tell myself it was nothing. I would say I had watched too much television in the dark, caught a reflection, and let my imagination do the rest. I would probably have forgotten it after a few days. But my brother was there. He saw movement in the same place. He looked in the same direction. He flinched at the same time. My wife did not see it, but that almost makes sense in a strange way. She was beside me and looking directly at the movie. Maybe whatever happened was only visible from a certain angle. Maybe she blinked at the wrong moment. Maybe it was so fast that anyone who was not already looking toward the kitchen would have missed it. Or maybe it was only a trick of the light that happened to catch two people's peripheral vision at once. I cannot say for sure. The house itself did not have a long history of strange things. At least not that I knew of. We did not move in because it was rumored to be haunted. We did not hear stories from neighbors. We did not have strange experiences every week. It was just the house my wife and I were living in at the time. That is another reason the moment felt so random. It did not come after weeks of being scared. It did not happen in an old abandoned building. It did not happen while we were looking for something paranormal. We were sitting in a normal living room, watching a normal movie, with the lights off, because that is how people watch movies. Then, something moved in the dark kitchen. I still think about the way it crouched. That may sound like a small detail, but it is the one I cannot forget. If it had been an ordinary shadow, I might have ignored it. If it had looked like a person standing normally, I might have assumed it was my eyes playing tricks on me. But the shape was tall and bent low. It looked like something that should not have been able to crouch in the way it did. It looked as though it was trying to stay hidden behind the counter or close to the floor. But it was still too tall to disappear. Then it moved toward us. Afterward, I remember not wanting to sit with my back to the kitchen. That is such a simple thing, but it changed the room for me. Before that night, the kitchen was just another room in the house. Afterward, I became aware of how much darkness sat behind us whenever the lights were off. I would notice the entrance when I watched television. I would look at the dark counters. I would see the doorway in my peripheral vision and remember that tall shape. For a while, I made sure a light was on somewhere in the kitchen at night. Not because I thought it would stop anything. More because I did not want to sit there wondering what might be standing just outside the glow of the television. My brother never forgot it either. We have talked about it since then, and it still makes both of us uncomfortable. The details may not be perfectly identical, because it was so fast, and because years can change the edges of a memory. But the core has always been the same. We were watching a movie. The room was dark. Something moved in the kitchen. We both turned. It rushed toward us. We both flinched. And then there was nothing there. I do not know what it was. Maybe it was a shadow. Maybe it was a reflection. Maybe it was our eyes reacting to the changing television light in the same way. Maybe there was a perfectly normal explanation that we never noticed because we were too scared in the moment. But I know how real it felt. I know my brother saw something too. And I know that for a few seconds, the kitchen 30 feet away from us did not feel empty at all. We will get back to the next confession in a moment. If you are new here, subscribe to Dead Air Confessions for more real stories from people who experienced something they still cannot explain. Your support helps keep these late-night broadcasts alive. You can also leave a like and tell me which story has unsettled you the most so far. Now, let's return to the signal. I was working in the lowest level of the place, as far down as you could go. It was past midnight, and by that point, almost everyone should have been asleep. The area was not somewhere people casually wandered through. It was a lower level full of equipment, pipes, narrow passages, and work areas that could feel confusing if you did not know your way around. There was one main ladder that connected the level to the area above. Once you were down there, the layout did not give you many simple ways to move around without being seen. That is why what happened bothered me so much. I was about 50 feet away from the ladder when I saw someone come down. At least, I thought it was someone. I was working in an area where I could see the ladder clearly enough. The lighting was not bright, but there was enough light to make out movement. You could see the metal structure, the surrounding equipment, and the basic shape of a person using the ladder. I watched something come down from above. It moved the way a person would move while climbing down. There was nothing dramatic about it at first. I saw a figure descend, reach the bottom, and then turn to the right, disappearing out of my line of sight. My first reaction was not fear. I did not think anything was wrong, because there had been repairs happening on that side of the area. People had been working on equipment there earlier, and it made sense that someone might have come down to check something, pick something up, or continue working. Even though it was late, I assumed it was one of the workers. I remember thinking I would walk over and talk to them for a minute. When you are working late at night, especially in a place where there are long, quiet stretches, you take any chance to speak to another person. A quick conversation can break up the boredom. You might ask what they are working on, complain about the shift, joke about how late it is, or just say hello. So I started walking toward where the person had gone. I was not in a hurry. I had no reason to be alarmed. I expected to turn the corner and find someone standing near the equipment, checking a panel, looking at tools, or doing whatever work had brought them down there. The figure had gone to the right, so I followed that direction. As I came around the corner, there was nobody there. At first, I did not think much of it. The area had more than one bend and several sections where someone could easily be hidden for a few seconds. I assumed they had simply moved farther along. Maybe they had heard something, realized they needed another tool, or gone around the next section to check equipment. So I kept walking. I moved a few more feet. Then I came around the next part of the area. Still nobody. That was when I stopped. The space ahead of me was empty. There was no worker standing near the equipment, no person crouched behind anything, no sound of someone moving, No footsteps, no voices, no tool noise, no clanging metal, nothing. I stood there for a moment, trying to make sense of it. I had just watched someone come down the ladder. I had seen them reach the bottom and go to the right. I had followed almost immediately. There was no reason for them to vanish before I reached the corner. I started looking around more carefully. Maybe they had gone into one of the side areas. Maybe there was another exit I had forgotten about. Maybe they had somehow doubled back without me noticing. But the more I thought about the layout, the less any of that made sense. The only way to leave that lower area would have required them to pass directly beneath and in front of me when I had been standing 50 feet away from the ladder. I had a clear enough view that I should have seen them. They could not have simply walked out without crossing an area where I would notice them. The other option would have been to backtrack toward the center, the same direction I was walking from. But again, that would have meant moving toward me, or passing close enough that I should have heard or seen them. There was no easy route out. The place was not open. It was not a big warehouse where someone could duck behind shelves and quietly leave through another door. It was a tight lower-level work area full of pipes, equipment, corners, and limited paths. If someone had come down that ladder and gone right, there were only a few places they could go, and every possible route seemed to lead back toward where I was. That was when the fears started. At first, I had been confused. Then I began to feel the hairs on my arms stand up. I was alone in the lowest level possible, in a place where everyone should have been asleep. I had watched a figure come down from above, followed it almost immediately, and found nothing. The quiet around me changed. It had probably been quiet the whole time, but once I realized there was no one there, I started hearing the silence differently. Every distant mechanical sound became more noticeable. Every small creak from the pipes felt like movement. The hum of equipment seemed louder. The area suddenly felt much bigger and much more enclosed at the same time. I kept looking toward the places where someone could be standing. Behind equipment, around corners, between pipes, near the ladder, but I did not see anyone. I remember trying to stay logical. Maybe I had seen a shadow. Maybe I had mistaken part of the equipment for a person climbing down the ladder. Maybe I was tired, and my eyes had turned ordinary movement into a figure. Maybe someone had actually been there, but found a way out that I had not noticed. There were plenty of possible explanations, and I wanted one of them to be true. I did not want to believe I had seen something that could not have been there. But the image of that figure coming down the ladder was clear in my mind. It did not feel like a random flicker in the corner of my eye. It moved like someone climbing. It came down from above. It reached the bottom. Then it went to the right. I had watched it happen. I stood there for another moment, trying to decide whether I should keep searching. Part of me wanted to prove there was a normal answer. I wanted to walk farther into the area and find a worker looking at a piece of equipment. I wanted someone to turn around and say something like, "Didn't mean to scare you," or "I was just checking this." But another part of me was telling me to leave. The lower level suddenly felt wrong. It was not just dark or quiet. It felt like I was somewhere I was not supposed to stay. The more I looked around, the more certain I became that I did not want to be alone down there. So I got out. I did not slowly finish what I was doing. I did not go back to work and pretend it had not happened. I headed back toward the ladder and left the area as quickly as I could without running. I remember looking at the ladder as I approached it. I kept expecting to see someone above me, looking down. I kept expecting to hear footsteps on the metal rungs. I kept expecting the figure to appear again. Nothing did. I climbed up and got out of that lower level. For the rest of the night, I did not go back down there. I could not make myself do it. There was work that needed to be done, but I was too unsettled. I let someone else know what I had seen. I explained that I watched someone come down the ladder and go into the lower area, but when I went over to talk to them, nobody was there. The person I told was confused too. They did not have an immediate answer. They did not tell me that another worker had been down there. They did not say someone had been sent to inspect equipment. They did not tell me I had misunderstood the schedule or missed somebody coming through. They were just as puzzled as I was. That almost made it worse. If someone had said, "Oh, that was probably this person," I might have relaxed. Even if the explanation did not completely fit, at least there would have been something to hold on to. But there was nothing. No name, no reason for anyone to be down there, no easy explanation for how someone could have come down the ladder and then disappeared without crossing my path. I spent the rest of that shift trying not to think about it too much. I told myself it was probably exhaustion. That is always one of the first explanations when something strange happens late at night. Lack of sleep can do strange things to your senses. When you are tired, your eyes catch movement that is not really there. Your brain fills in details. You can mistake a shadow for a person or see a familiar pattern in something random. Maybe that was all it was. Maybe I had stared at the ladder and seen a combination of shadows and machinery that looked like someone climbing down. Maybe my mind had created the movement because I expected someone to be working in that area. Maybe I had been more tired than I realized. I wanted to believe that. But the experience stayed with me. The problem was not just that I thought I saw someone. People missy things all the time. The problem was how naturally I reacted to it. I did not feel confused when I first saw the figure. I did not stand there wondering whether it was real. I immediately assumed it was a person. I even started walking over to make small talk. That meant my brain had accepted it as normal before I had time to question it. Then I turned the corner and found emptiness. That was the moment that changed everything. For a while afterward, I avoided being alone in that area at night, whenever I could. I still had to go down there sometimes, but I did not like it. I would look toward the ladder before I started down. I would listen carefully. I would make sure I knew where everyone else was working. The lower level had always been uncomfortable in a normal way. It was the lowest part of the place, far from the main work areas, full of pipes and equipment, and quiet late at night. But after what happened, it felt different. Every time I was down there, I thought about the figure. I thought about how it had come down the ladder. I thought about how it had turned right. I thought about the empty corner where I expected to find someone. I never saw it again myself. Months passed. I eventually started thinking maybe I had been right about being tired. Maybe it was just one strange moment my brain created during a long night. The more time passed, the easier it was to talk myself into that explanation. Then my coworker had a similar experience. It happened several months later, in the same lower area. The details were not exactly the same. He saw the figure moving in the opposite direction from where I had seen it. But the important part was the same. He saw someone, or something, that looked like someone, moving through an area where they should not have been able to disappear. He had been working down there when he noticed a figure move away from him. Just like me, he assumed it was another person. At that point, there were more people working around the clock, so it was not as strange for someone to be up and moving around. People were awake. There were workers in different sections. The place was not as empty as it had been during my experience. That should have made it easier to explain, but it did not. My coworker saw the figure go in a direction where the only way out was either directly past where he was standing or through a tight, difficult route beneath and around pipes. There was no easy path. If it had been a real person, they would have had to pass close to him, or they would have had to squeeze through a cramped section of pipework. in a way that would not have been easy, quiet, or likely. He followed the movement enough to check. Nobody was there. No one came past him. No worker crawled through the pipes. No one called out. Nothing. When he told me about it, I felt two things at once. The first feeling was relief. I was not the only one. For months I had wondered whether the experience was entirely in my head. I had questioned myself. I had told myself I was tired, stressed, or seeing things because it was late. Hearing that someone else had seen something strange in the same area made me feel less foolish. But the second feeling was much worse. It meant that maybe I had not imagined it. Maybe there really was something about that lower level that neither of us understood. I do not know what it was. I do not know if it was a ghost, a shadow, a trick of lighting, an equipment reflection, sleep deprivation, or something else entirely. I do not know if the two experiences were connected. Maybe both of us were seeing the same kind of visual illusion. The area had strange lighting, metal surfaces, pipes, shadows, and equipment that could create confusing shapes. Maybe a certain angle made it look like someone was moving through the space. Maybe the sound of machinery, the dim light, and the late hours made our brains expect a person to be there. Maybe we both saw nothing more than our own tired eyes misreading the environment. That is still the explanation I prefer, but I cannot deny that it was unsettling. The area had limited ways in and out. That was the part both of us focused on. If a real person had been there, they should have been trapped by the layout. They should have had to pass in front of us, under us, or back through the same route we had been using. Yet both times the figure was gone. No sound, no movement, no explanation. I do not think whatever it was wanted to harm us. Nothing bad happened after either experience. Nobody got hurt. Nothing touched either of us. There were no voices, no threats, no objects moving, and no strange events that followed us out of the area. The figure, if it was a figure, simply appeared to move through the space and then disappeared. That should have made it less frightening. In some ways, it did. But it also created a different kind of unease. It is easier to understand something that attacks you. You can call it dangerous, react to it, and try to protect yourself. It is harder to understand something that simply appears in a place where it should not be, moves like a person, and then leaves no trace. There was no clear reason for it, no message, no explanation, no way to know whether it was aware of us or whether we were only seeing something that did not belong to our normal understanding of the space. After my coworker told me his story, we talked about the possible routes again. We went through the layout. We considered where a person could have gone. We considered whether someone could have squeezed through the pipes. Technically, maybe they could have, if they were determined enough. But it would have been awkward. It would have taken time. It would have made noise. It was not the kind of route someone would casually take in the middle of work. And it still did not explain why neither of us saw anyone afterward. That is why the experience has stayed with me. I do not need to call it a demon. I do not need to call it a ghost. I do not need to believe something supernatural was living in that lower level. But I know what I saw, or at least what I thought I saw. Someone came down the ladder. They went to the right. I followed them. No one was there. Months later, another person saw something similar in the same area. That does not prove anything, but it makes it harder to say it was nothing. Even now, I would rather believe our eyes were playing tricks on us. I would rather believe that late shifts, poor sleep, dim lighting, pipes, shadows, and tired brains created the same kind of illusion. That is the explanation that makes the most sense. But every once in a while, I still think about that ladder. I think about standing 50 feet away and watching someone climb down. I think about following them around the corner. I think about the empty space waiting for me there. and I think about how quickly I left that lower level and refused to go back down for the rest of the night. When I was a teenager, I was bored a lot. I lived in that stage of life where nothing seemed exciting unless it was late, slightly reckless, or involved being somewhere I probably should not have been. I hung out with a bad crowd, sometimes. Not necessarily people who were evil or dangerous in some huge dramatic way, but the kind of friends who made bad decisions seem normal. We would stay out too late, wander around places we had no reason to be, and act like getting into trouble was proof that we were not scared of anything. At the time, I thought that was just what teenagers did. Looking back, I think we were all just trying to avoid going home. One night, we had been out much later than we should have been. I do not even remember exactly what we had been doing before we started heading toward the bus stop. We may have been hanging around outside somewhere, walking from one place to another, talking too loudly, messing around, or just killing time, because nobody wanted the night to end. Eventually, though, we had to get home. The buses were still running, but we did not have a lot of time to waste. We needed to reach the bus stop, and one of my friends decided he knew the quickest way. His shortcut went through a cemetery. Even before we got there, I did not like the idea. I remember slowing down when he suggested it. A cemetery at night was not somewhere I wanted to walk through, especially when we were already tired and it was late enough that almost nobody else was outside. During the day, cemeteries are sad and quiet, but they do not necessarily feel frightening. You can see the paths, the gravestones, the flowers left by families, and the people visiting loved ones. At night, it is different. At night, every headstone becomes a shadow. Every tree looks like a person standing still. Every path seems longer than it should be. And even if you do not believe in ghosts, something about walking through a place where hundreds of people are buried makes you feel like you should not be there. I told my friends I did not want to go through the cemetery. I do not remember the exact words, but I know I was not trying to sound brave. I probably said something like, "Why can't we just go around?" Or, "That's a bad idea." I may have made a joke about it, because joking is easier than admitting you are scared. But they had already started walking toward the entrance. I stood there for a second, considering whether I should take the longer route by myself. Then I realized I did not want to be left alone outside at night either. That was the problem. I did not want to go through the cemetery with them, but I wanted even less to stand by myself on a dark street while they disappeared into it. So I followed. The entrance to the cemetery was simple, nothing dramatic. It may have had an old gate or an opening between stone posts. I do not remember exactly, but I remember the feeling of crossing into the grounds. It felt like stepping from one kind of darkness into another. The street behind us had a few lights. Inside the cemetery, there were almost none. The moon may have been out, but not brightly enough to help much. There was enough dim light to see the outlines of stones and the pale paths between them, but not enough to make anything clear. The rows of graves stretched away into the dark. Some headstones were tall and narrow, some were low and flat, some leaned slightly, as if they had been settling into the ground for years. There were trees scattered through the cemetery too, and their branches moved faintly above us. I remember being careful about where I stepped. When I was younger, I had always heard that you should not step on tombstones. I did not know whether it was because of respect, bad luck, religion, or just something adults told children to stop them from climbing around in cemeteries. But I had always believed it. Even though I was there against my better judgment, I still did not want to be disrespectful. So while the others walked ahead, I tried to watch my feet. I stepped between the headstones, avoided the flat markers, and tried not to walk over graves if I could help it. It was difficult in the dark because I could not always tell where the paths ended and where the burial plots began. The cemetery seemed much larger at night. During the day, you can see where it ends. You can see the road beyond it, the fences, the trees, other buildings nearby. At night, the darkness makes everything look endless. The rows of graves seemed to continue farther than they should have. We could hear our footsteps, but every other sound seemed swallowed by the place. At first, my friends were still talking. They were not loud, exactly. Maybe they were trying to act normal. Maybe they were trying to prove that the cemetery did not scare them. One person made a joke about ghosts. Someone else told them to shut up. Another friend laughed, but it was one of those nervous laughs that sounds forced. I remember wishing we would just walk faster. The quicker we got through, the quicker we would be back on a regular street with lights and cars and people. Then we saw the figure. It was standing near one of the graves. At first, I did not know what I was looking at. It was dark, almost completely black against the gray darkness around it. It was far enough away that I could not see details, but close enough that it clearly did not look like an ordinary headstone. It was shaped like a person, tall and upright, standing still beside a grave. All of us stopped. Nobody said anything for a second. I do not think any of us knew what to do. The first thought that went through my mind was that it was a real person. That was terrifying enough. A person standing alone in a cemetery at night is not automatically supernatural, but it is still not something you want to see when you are a teenager cutting through a graveyard on the way to catch a bus. We did not know if it was someone visiting a grave, someone homeless, someone drunk, someone trying to scare people, or someone who was angry that we were walking through the cemetery. Whatever it was, it stood completely still. No movement, no sound, no sign that it had noticed us. We all stared at it. The longer we looked, the worse it became. At first, it was just a dark person-shaped silhouette, but as our eyes adjusted, or as we focused harder, we realized something was wrong with the shape of its head. There did not seem to be one. The figure looked headless. I remember the exact moment it registered. It was not like someone said it out loud first. It was more like we all noticed it at the same time. The outline of the shoulders was there. The upper body was there. The arms seemed to be there, hanging or resting at the sides. But above the shoulders, there was nothing. No face, no hair, no hat, no head. Just darkness, where a head should have been. We all gasped, not quietly. It was one of those sudden, sharp group reactions where everyone pulls in a breath at once. I remember hearing it clearly, like the sound came from one person, even though several of us had done it. For 1 second, nobody moved. We stood there in the cemetery, staring at what looked like a headless figure standing beside a grave. I cannot say whether it moved. I do not remember it stepping toward us or raising its arms. I do not remember a voice. I do not remember it turning its body in our direction. But I did not need it to do anything. The sight alone was enough. Someone screamed. Then everyone ran. We did not walk quickly. We did not calmly turn around and head for the exit. We ran as hard as we could. I remember the feeling of panic taking over my whole body. My heart slammed against my chest. My legs moved before I had time to think. I was not paying attention to being respectful anymore. I was not carefully avoiding headstones. I was just trying to get out of there. We ran like our lives depended on it. I have described it before as running like Flojo, because that is exactly how it felt. We were flying. Nobody wanted to be the last person. Nobody wanted to look behind them. Nobody wanted to slow down in case the figure was following us. The cemetery path blurred beneath us. Headstones flashed past on either side. The trees became black streaks. I remember hearing someone stumble or curse, but I do not know if anyone actually fell. I only know that we kept running until we reached the edge of the cemetery and got back onto the street. Once we were out, we did not stop immediately. We kept going toward the bus stop. The streetlights felt brighter than they had before. The normal sounds of the street felt almost comforting. Cars in the distance, traffic, people talking somewhere nearby, even the sound of a bus approaching, all felt safer than the silence inside the cemetery. By the time we reached the bus stop, we were breathing hard. Nobody was laughing. Nobody was trying to act tough. We stood there, or sat there, looking at each other, trying to understand what had just happened. I remember that strange silence between us. We all knew we had seen something. We all knew nobody wanted to be the first person to say exactly what it looked like. Maybe one of us asked, "Did you see that?" Maybe somebody said, "What the hell was that?" But I remember the bus ride more clearly than the first conversation at the stop. We got onto the bus and sat quietly. That was unusual for us. Normally, after a night out, we would have been loud. We would have been talking over each other, making jokes, teasing one another, talking about where we had been or planning what to do next. But after the cemetery, nobody had much to say. We sat there with our adrenaline still high, looking out the windows or staring at the floor. The bus moved through normal streets, passing stores, houses, lights, and people who had no idea that a few teenagers had just run out of a cemetery terrified. I kept replaying the figure in my mind. At first, I tried to tell myself it was just a person. Maybe someone had been standing at a grave, wearing dark clothes. Maybe their head had blended into the trees behind them. Maybe they had been bending down or standing in front of something that made the shape look wrong. Maybe there was a tall headstone directly behind them. Maybe they had a hood or dark clothing that made their head disappear in the shadows. But I could not get rid of the image. The figure had looked too tall, too still, and too empty above the shoulders. It had looked like there was genuinely no head. For years I avoided cemeteries whenever I could. I still go to funerals. I still show up when I need to be there for someone I care about. I understand that cemeteries are places of grief and remembrance. I do not avoid them, because I think every cemetery is haunted or dangerous. But I do not go casually. I do not wander around them. I do not take shortcuts through them. I do not walk through them at night. I do not go there just because I am bored. There are only two people in my life who were dear enough to me that I have gone to the cemetery specifically to visit their graves. Outside of that, I stay away. For a long time, I did not think much about whether the figure could have been a statue. That seemed like the most logical explanation. Cemeteries have statues. They have angels, crosses, memorial figures, large stone monuments, and all kinds of shapes that can look strange in the dark. A statue could easily appear headless from one angle, especially if the light was poor. Years later, I started wondering if that was what we saw. Maybe we had all been teenagers with overactive imaginations. Maybe we had entered the cemetery already nervous. Maybe one dark shape caught our attention, and then our fear made the shape look more disturbing than it was. I thought maybe it had been a statue standing near the grave. That would explain why it had not moved. It would explain why it looked like a human figure but did not react to us. It would explain why it seemed to have no head. So I tried to find out. I looked into it. I asked around. I thought about the cemetery layout and tried to remember the part we had walked through. I wanted a normal answer. I wanted to be able to tell myself that there had been a stone angel, a memorial statue, or some old sculpture near the grave. But as far as I could find out, there had never been a statue there. That was the part that got under my skin. There was no known statue in that location. No large monument shaped like a person. No angel. No sculpture. No memorial figure. Nothing that should have looked like a tall, headless silhouette standing beside a grave. That does not mean there was definitely something supernatural there. I know that. Memories are unreliable, especially memories from teenage years. We were walking through a cemetery at night. We were already scared. It is possible that we were not even looking at the exact place we later thought we were. Maybe we misunderstood the location. Maybe there was an object that was later removed. Maybe someone had placed something there temporarily. Maybe there was a person there after all. But the possibility of a statue had always been the one explanation that made me feel better. And finding out there had not been one made the memory feel strange again. I have thought a lot about why we all reacted the way we did. Teenagers influence each other. That is true. One person gets scared, and everyone else starts seeing danger. Someone gasps, and suddenly the whole group is terrified. A shadow looks like a person because someone says it is a person. A strange shape looks headless because one frightened person says, "Where is its head?" That is possible. Maybe one of us saw a dark form and froze. Maybe the rest of us followed their reaction. Maybe fear spread through the group so quickly that our minds filled in the same terrifying details. But I do not remember anyone saying it looked headless before we all gasped. I remember seeing it. I remember the empty shape above its shoulders. I remember how the figure seemed darker than the darkness around it. And I remember how still it stood. The truth is, I do not know what it was. It could have been a person in dark clothes, standing by a grave for reasons we never understood. It could have been someone wearing a hood or some kind of costume. It could have been an object that looked human from a distance. It could have been a grave marker or a broken tree shape that our eyes turned into a person. It could have been a combination of darkness, fear, exhaustion, and a group of teenagers already nervous about cutting through a cemetery. I cannot prove otherwise. But I know we ran. I know none of us wanted to go back and check. And I know that night changed something for all of us. Right after that experience, we all stopped our bad behavior. That sounds dramatic, but it is true. I do not know if it was because we suddenly realized we were not invincible. Maybe the cemetery scared some sense into us. Maybe running through the dark after seeing that figure made all of us recognize how stupid some of our choices had been. We had been hanging around late at night, cutting through places we should not have been, acting like nothing could happen to us because we were young. Then we saw something we could not explain. Something that scared us enough to make us run without stopping. After that, the nights out changed. We stopped doing some of the things we had been doing. We stopped putting ourselves in situations where we were alone somewhere dark and far from help. We stopped treating fear like a joke. Maybe it was just growing up. Maybe we were already getting tired of the trouble we had been causing. Maybe the cemetery incident became an excuse for us to change. But I like to think we all took it as a warning. Not necessarily from a ghost, not necessarily from anything supernatural, just a warning that we were heading in the wrong direction. I still remember the cemetery more clearly than most places from that time in my life. I remember the quiet. I remember trying not to step on tombstones. I remember seeing the dark shape standing beside the grave. I remember the shock of realizing it appeared to have no head. I remember everyone gasping. I remember screaming and running as hard as I could, and I remember the silence on the bus afterward. Nobody said much, because none of us knew what to say. How do you explain something like that? How do you admit you were terrified by a shape in the dark without sounding ridiculous? How do you say, "I think I saw a headless person in a cemetery," and expect anyone to take you seriously? So, we mostly kept it to ourselves, but the memory never went away. Even now, years later, I still do not enjoy being in cemeteries. I will go when I need to go. I will attend funerals. I will visit the graves of the two people I loved deeply enough to make me face that discomfort. But I do not linger. I do not wander around after dark. I do not take shortcuts through them, and I definitely do not walk through one late at night just to catch a bus. Because I still remember the thing we saw beside that grave. Tall, dark, standing completely still, and missing its head. I was in the bathroom one night when I heard what I thought was a doorknob turning repeatedly. At first, I did not think much of it. Houses make strange noises at night. Pipes knock inside the walls. Doors shift in their frames when the temperature changes. Old floorboards creak. Sometimes a sound comes from another room and seems much closer than it really is. I had heard plenty of normal nighttime noises before, so I tried not to let it bother me. But this did not sound like the house settling. It sounded like someone was trying to turn a doorknob. The sound came in short movements, one after another. A soft metallic rattle, then a pause. Another turn, then another. It was not loud enough to sound violent, but it was clear enough that I stopped what I was doing and listened. For a few seconds, I stood still in the bathroom. The sound happened again. The knob seemed to turn once, then stop. Then it turned again. I remember trying to work out which door it could be. The bathroom door was closed, but the sound did not seem to be coming from the handle right in front of me. It sounded farther down the hallway. It had the familiar small click and movement of a knob being tested by someone on the other side of a door. That immediately made me uneasy. I was home, and as far as I knew, there should not have been anyone else moving around. It was late. The house was dark, the kind of dark where all the normal rooms take on unfamiliar shapes, and every open doorway looks deeper than it should. I told myself it could be something simple. Maybe there was a draft. Maybe a door was not latched properly. Maybe the sound came from a closet or a cabinet, and I was hearing it wrong. But then I heard the knob turn again. This time I was certain it was not my imagination. I finished up quickly and opened the bathroom door. The hallway outside was dark. There was only a little light coming from the bathroom behind me. It spread out across part of the floor and caught the edges of the walls, but most of the hallway was shadowed. My bedroom door was farther down, and I could see its outline in the darkness. I stepped out slowly. I remember standing there, listening. At first, there was nothing. No footsteps, no talking, no sound of someone walking away, no door shutting somewhere else in the house. The silence was almost worse than the doorknob sound had been. If I had heard someone move away, I could have told myself there was a reason. Maybe a family member had gone into another room. Maybe someone had gotten up for water. Maybe there was a simple explanation. But there was nothing. I walked down the hallway until I reached my bedroom door. I stopped right in front of it. The room beyond it was completely dark. The door was closed, or at least close enough to shut that I could not see inside. I remember staring at it, trying to convince myself that I had misheard the sound. Maybe it had come from the bathroom. Maybe it had come from a pipe. Maybe I had let the quiet of the house turn some normal sound into something more frightening. Then, the bedroom door began to open. Slowly, it did not fly open. It did not slam against the wall. It creaked inward, inch by inch, with that long, low sound old doors make when their hinges have not been oiled in a while. The movement was so slow that I could watch it happening. The door opened a little, then a little more. The darkness inside my room became visible through the gap. I did not move. I just stood there, frozen in the hallway, watching the door open by itself. It came to a stop about halfway, not fully open, not closed again. Halfway, the room beyond it was black. I could not see my bed clearly. I could not see the far wall. I could only make out faint shapes where furniture should have been. The bathroom light behind me did not reach far enough into the room to show anything useful. For a moment, I expected someone to step out. That was the thought that hit me first. Maybe somebody was in my room. Maybe the person who had been turning the doorknob was inside. Maybe someone had been standing behind the door and had just opened it. But nobody came out. The door stayed still. The room stayed dark, and I stared into it for what felt like minutes. It might not have been minutes. It could have been 20 seconds. It could have been less than a minute. But fear stretches time out in a strange way. When you are standing in a hallway, looking into a dark room that should be empty, every second feels like something is about to happen. I remember listening for breathing. I listened for the sound of fabric moving. I listened for footsteps on the carpet. I listened for anything that would tell me I was not alone. There was nothing. The silence inside the room felt thick. I kept telling myself to turn on the light. It was such a simple thing. The switch was right there. One movement and the whole room would be lit. I would see that nothing was there and feel stupid for being scared. But my body would not move at first. There is something about darkness that makes you hesitate even when you know a light switch is close. You begin to imagine what the light might reveal. You worry that the dark is safer because at least you do not know what is inside it. Finally, I made myself reach for the switch. My hand felt shaky. I flicked it on. The room filled with light. And there was nobody there. No one was standing behind the door. No one was sitting on the bed. No one was hiding in the corner. No one was crouched under the window or pressed against the wall. Everything in the room looked normal. My bed was where it should have been. My clothes were where I had left them. The furniture had not moved. There was no open window. No sign that anyone had been inside. I stood there for a long time anyway, looking around. I checked behind the door. I looked in the closet. I looked under the bed even though I knew how ridiculous that probably looked. But once you are scared enough, you do not care about looking ridiculous. You need to know that the room is empty. It was. The room was empty. The door was open halfway, and I still had no explanation for why it had moved. I tried to think of normal reasons. Maybe the latch had not caught. Maybe the house had shifted. Maybe there was a draft coming through a vent or crack somewhere. Maybe the door had been partly open already and I did not notice. Maybe I had somehow bumped it when I walked down the hallway. All of those things were possible. But none of them felt right in the moment. The door had not simply drifted open. It had creaked open slowly in front of me, then stopped at exactly the halfway point. It looked deliberate, even though I knew that was probably my fear adding meaning to something mechanical. After checking the room, I did not want to turn the light back off. I left it on for a while. I went through the rest of the house too, just to make sure nobody had somehow come in. I checked the doors. I checked the windows. I listened at the ends of hallways. Everything was locked. Everything was quiet. There was no one else there. Eventually, I went back to bed, but I did not sleep well. Every small sound felt louder after that. The refrigerator turning on sounded like someone moving in the kitchen. A pipe settling sounded like a footstep. The house creaking made me look toward my bedroom door again and again. For the next few nights, I kept thinking about the knob. That repeated turning sound had come before the door opened. I could not get that sequence out of my head. It was like something had tested the handle first, then waited for me to come out of the bathroom, then opened the bedroom door while I stood there watching. That thought made no sense, but fear does not always care about logic. The strange thing was that the experience did not stop there. At first, nothing dramatic happened again. There were no more doors opening in front of me. I did not hear the doorknob every night. The house returned to its normal, quiet routine, and after a while, I began to think maybe the whole thing had been a weird coincidence. Then I started waking up in bed, not gradually. Not the normal way where you wake up because you need water, hear a sound, or roll over and check the time. I would wake up suddenly because something had poked me hard in the back. It was not a gentle touch. It was not the feeling of fabric bunching up under me or my own muscles twitching. It felt like a finger or a knuckle or some kind of firm point pressing directly into my back hard enough to make me jump awake. The first time it happened, I was disoriented. I woke up with a sharp jolt and immediately turned around. Nobody was there. The room was dark, and for a few seconds, I just lay there trying to understand why I had woken up. My back still had that lingering feeling, like someone had jabbed me between my shoulder blade and spine. I told myself it was probably a muscle spasm. That seemed like the most reasonable answer. People twitch in their sleep. Muscles jump. Your body can make strange sensations when you are half asleep. Maybe I had rolled onto something. Maybe the mattress had pressed against me in a weird way. So I tried to go back to sleep. Then it happened again on another night. The same thing, a hard poke in the back, enough to wake me instantly. I turned around. Nothing. At first, I did not notice a pattern. I just knew it was happening more than once. Every time I would wake up startled, lying in the dark, trying to calm myself down. I would sit up and look around the room. I would check the door. I would make sure there was nothing near the bed. There never was. But after a while, I began checking the clock, and that was when it became worse. It happened at the same time, not exactly down to the second every night, but close enough that I noticed. I would wake up with that hard poke in my back, grab my phone or look at the clock, and see the same time range again. Once you notice a pattern like that, you cannot stop noticing it. Before, I could tell myself that I was waking randomly. I could blame dreams, stress, sleeping wrong, or muscle movement. But when the same thing happens at almost the same time over and over, your mind starts looking for a reason. I began dreading bedtime. That may sound extreme, but sleep is supposed to be the one time you can completely relax. You close your eyes, pull the blankets up, and let the rest of the world disappear for a while. But when you start expecting to be woken up by something you cannot explain, bedtime becomes tense. I would lie there thinking about whether it would happen again. I would check the door. I would make sure the room was clear. I would adjust my position so my back was against the wall or pressed into the mattress in a way that made me feel less exposed. Still, some nights, I would wake up with that same hard poke, always in the back, always sudden, always enough to make my heart race. Afterward, I would lie there staring into the dark, afraid to turn around too quickly, but also afraid not to. I would listen for sounds in the room. I would wait for the feeling of someone standing near the bed. I would tell myself that there was no one there. And there never was, but the sensation felt real. That was the problem. You can explain a sound away more easily than a physical feeling. A house can creak. Pipes can knock. A door can move because of air pressure. But when it feels like something directly poked you, it is harder to tell yourself it was nothing. I still tried. I thought about sleep paralysis, though I was not frozen when it happened. I thought about hypnic jerks, muscle spasms, and the strange sensations people get while transitioning between sleep and waking. I thought about whether I was dreaming that I had been touched. Maybe I was. Dreams can feel incredibly physical. You can dream that someone grabs your arm, shakes you awake, presses on your chest, or whispers in your ear. Then you wake up with your body still reacting to it. The mind can make a sensation feel real even if there was no outside cause. That explanation should have comforted me. Sometimes it did, but other times I would remember how awake I felt right after the poke. I would remember sitting up immediately, my heart pounding, my back still burning from the sensation. I would remember checking the room and finding nothing. Eventually, it got bad enough that I sometimes slept with the light on. I hated doing that. Sleeping with a light on can make you feel childish, even when you have a real reason to be uncomfortable. I did not want to admit I was scared of my own room. I did not want to be the person who needed a lamp on because of a bad feeling. But darkness had started to feel different after the door incident. The dark no longer felt empty. It felt like it was hiding something just beyond where I could see, so I would leave a light on. Sometimes it was a lamp. Sometimes it was a hallway light that spilled into the room. Sometimes I left the bedroom light on low enough that I could still sleep, but bright enough that I could see the door, the corners, and the space around the bed. It did not completely stop me from waking up, but it made the room feel less threatening. If I woke up after a poke, I could immediately look around and see that no one was there. I did not have to sit in total darkness, trying to decide whether there was a shape near the bed or whether my eyes were playing tricks on me. The light gave me something solid. It gave me proof that the room was empty. Over time, the experiences became less frequent, or maybe I simply became used to them. It is hard to say. Sometimes fear gets quieter when nothing new happens. You begin to tell yourself that whatever caused it has passed, or that you have finally found a way to explain it. But I never fully forgot it. Even now, I can remember standing in that hallway and watching my bedroom door slowly open. I remember the creak. I remember the dark gap widening. I remember the feeling of staring into my own room as if it belonged to someone else. And I remember waking up with that hard poke in my back, sitting straight up in bed, and looking around for a person who was never there. Maybe there was a normal reason for every part of it. Maybe the doorknob sound came from another room, carried oddly through the house. Maybe the bedroom door had a loose latch and opened because of pressure or a draft. Maybe the pokes were muscle spasms, dreams, or my own body waking me up at the same point in a sleep cycle. Those explanations are possible. Honestly, I hope they are true. But at the time, lying in bed with the light on because I was afraid of being touched again, it did not feel like a harmless explanation. It felt like something in that house had noticed me, and for a while, I was never able to sleep without wondering whether I would wake up at the same time, with the same hard poke in my back, and find my room empty again. When I was a small kid, I did not sleep well in my room. I could never explain exactly why. Nothing in the room looked especially frightening during the day. It was just my bedroom, with my bed, my things, the same walls I saw every morning when I woke up and every night before I went to sleep. But once it got dark, the room never felt fully quiet. There were always sounds. Sometimes there would be faint footsteps, or something that sounded like footsteps, coming from inside the walls or above the ceiling. Other times there were scratching noises. They were not loud enough to make the whole house wake up, but they were noticeable when you were a child lying awake in the dark. A soft scrape, a quick scratching sound, then silence, then another faint movement somewhere near the wall. At first, my family had a simple explanation for it. The house had half-timbered walls, and there were mice living inside them. We believed the mice had made tunnels through the spaces in the walls and that they were moving around at night. That explanation made sense. Old houses make noises. Mice scratch. They move through walls. They chew, scrape, and travel along hidden spaces where you cannot see them. If you are lying in bed in a quiet house, every tiny sound seems bigger than it really is. So that was what we told ourselves. There were mice in the walls. That was all. My sister never seemed bothered by any of it. She slept fine. She could go to bed, close her door, and wake up the next morning without mentioning strange noises or bad dreams. The scratching did not seem to bother her. The nighttime sounds did not keep her awake. She did not complain about footsteps, and she never acted afraid of the rooms in that part of the house. My mum, however, had problems sleeping too. Her bedroom was right next to mine in the adjacent room. I was not the only one who heard things at night. My mum would sometimes hear the same noises I did. The faint movement, the scratching, the strange sounds that seemed too heavy to be mice, but too quiet to clearly identify. It was never enough to make us call the police or search the house in panic. It was not like someone was loudly walking through the hallway. It was not like doors were slamming or voices were calling out. It was quieter than that, more subtle. The kind of thing you notice only when you're trying to fall asleep. Sometimes I would lie in bed and listen to the house, trying to work out where the sounds were coming from. I would stare at the wall, knowing there was probably nothing on the other side except wooden beams, insulation, empty spaces, and mice tunnels. But when you are young, knowing something is probably harmless does not always make it feel harmless. The scratching could come from one spot, stop, then seem to continue somewhere else. The footsteps, or what sounded like footsteps, could seem to move from my room toward my mum's room. That was what made it difficult to ignore. Mice scratching inside a wall made sense. But mice did not really explain footsteps. Still, we chose the explanation that made the most sense. It was an old house. There were animals in the walls. Wood expands and contracts. Pipes make noise. Floorboards creak. A sound can travel strangely through a building and seem like it is coming from somewhere else. That was enough for most nights. Or at least, we tried to make it enough. Then one weekend night, something happened that made the whole situation feel different. I was older by then, old enough to be going to parties. I had been out late and I came home around 2 in the morning. The street outside was quiet. The whole neighborhood had that deep nighttime stillness where almost every house is dark and no cars are moving unless someone is coming home from work or returning from somewhere they stayed too long. I remember feeling tired, not completely exhausted, but tired enough that I was ready to get inside, take off my shoes, and go to bed. I was probably trying to be quiet because everyone else in the house should have been asleep. I opened the front door carefully. The house was dark. There may have been a little light coming in from outside, or maybe some faint glow from a lamp left on downstairs, but mostly everything was shadowed. The familiar rooms looked different at that hour. The hallway seemed longer. The corners were darker. The normal sounds of the house had stopped, or maybe I was too focused on getting inside quietly to notice them. I walked farther into the house. That was when I saw my mum's bedroom door. It was wide open, not cracked open, not slightly ajar, entirely open. I stopped when I saw it. At first, I wondered if she had simply left it open before going to sleep. People leave doors open all the time. Maybe she wanted air to circulate. Maybe she had gotten up during the night and forgotten to close it. Maybe she had heard something and opened the door to listen. But the more I looked at it, the more I knew something was wrong. That door did not open on its own. It was not one of those lightweight doors that could drift open with a draft. The carpet beneath it made that impossible. The bottom of the door pushed into the carpet when it moved. It had resistance. You had to use some force to open it fully or close it properly. Even closing it took effort sometimes. The carpet caught against the bottom edge, and the door would stop or drag if you did not push it. It could not just swing wide open from a breeze or a change in air pressure. Someone had to push it. That was the first thing I thought. Someone must have opened it. But everyone should have been asleep. My sister's room was quiet. The rest of the house was quiet. There was no sound of anyone walking around. I stood in the hallway for a moment, looking at the open doorway. The room beyond it was dark. I could not see my mum clearly from where I was standing. I could see the outline of furniture and the shape of the bed, but the room was mostly shadows. I remember hesitating before I went inside. Part of me did not want to. There was no clear reason not to enter. It was my mum's room. Maybe she was awake. Maybe she had opened the door because she needed something. Maybe she was asleep and had simply forgotten to close it. But the sight of that door fully open at 2 a.m. gave me a bad feeling. I stepped into the room. My mum was in bed. At first, she looked like she was asleep. Then she suddenly started yelling, "Stop, don't touch me." The sound hit me so hard that I froze. She was not speaking normally. She sounded terrified. It was the kind of panic that comes from someone who is not fully awake, someone caught in a nightmare or half dream, but still reacting as though whatever they are seeing is real. She shouted again, "Stop, don't touch me." For a second, I did not know what to do. I had just walked into a dark room because her door was open, and now my mum was yelling as if someone was hurting her. My first thought was that she might be having a nightmare. My second thought was that there might actually be someone in the room. I looked around quickly. The room was dark, but I could see enough to know there was no obvious person standing beside the bed. There was nobody near the door, nobody in the corner, nobody walking away. Still, I felt my heart start racing. I went closer to her and tried to wake her up. I said her name. At first, she did not respond normally. She was still caught in whatever dream she was having. Her face looked frightened, and her hands were moving slightly, like she was trying to push something away. I called to her again. Then she woke up. It took her a moment to understand where she was. She looked confused and upset. She was breathing hard, and I could tell she had not simply been having an ordinary dream. I asked her what happened. She told me she had dreamed that someone touched her face with cold hands. That was all she said at first. Someone had touched her face. Cold hands. She said it in a way that made the room feel even colder than it already was. I remember standing there, trying to process everything at once. The bedroom door was fully open, a door that could not easily open by itself because of the thick carpet underneath it. My mum was asleep in bed, and she had just woken up yelling for someone to stop touching her. I asked her if she had opened the door. She said no. She had not opened it. She had been asleep. That answer stayed with me. I asked again because I wanted there to be another explanation. Maybe she had gotten up and forgotten. Maybe she had opened the door while half asleep. Maybe she had gone to the bathroom and returned to bed without remembering exactly what she did. People do strange things when they are tired, but she was sure. She had not opened it. She told me she had been asleep when she felt those cold hands in the dream. The room was quiet after that. Not peaceful quiet. The kind of quiet where both people are listening for the next sound. I do not know whether I checked the rest of the house that night. I probably did. It would have been natural to look in the hallway, check the doors, and make sure nobody else was walking around. But I do not remember finding anything. There was no intruder, no person hiding in the house, no explanation for the door, nothing that made the situation easier to understand. I eventually went to bed, but I did not sleep well. That night, Every normal house sound seemed different. A creak in the floor made me think someone was walking. A small scratch in the wall made me think of the mice. A shift in the pipes made me think of the bedroom door opening. I kept picturing my mom lying in bed, dreaming that someone with cold hands was touching her face. I kept thinking about the way she yelled, "Stop! Don't touch me!" And I kept wondering who had opened the door. For a while after that, I paid closer attention to the rooms at night. I noticed whether my door was fully shut before I went to sleep. I noticed whether my mom's door was open or closed. I listened harder when I heard footsteps in the hallway. The sound of scratching inside the walls became harder to dismiss. Before that night, I could tell myself it was mice. Afterward, I still knew it was probably mice, but the explanation did not feel as complete anymore. There were nights when I would hear the scratch sound inside the timbered wall and remind myself that rodents were active after dark. That was normal. Mice were supposed to make noises in an old house. Then, a few minutes later, I would hear what sounded like slow steps somewhere near the rooms. Not clear footsteps. Not loud enough for me to say someone was definitely walking, but enough that I would stop breathing for a second and listen. Sometimes the sound would stop when I focused on it. Sometimes it would seem to move farther away. Sometimes I would hear nothing else at all. My sister continued to sleep without problems. That was almost strange in its own way. She never seemed scared of the house. She did not wake up talking about cold hands. She did not complain about scratching in the walls. She did not mention footsteps. Maybe she was simply a deeper sleeper than my mom and I were. Maybe she did not pay attention to the same noises. Maybe the whole thing affected us differently because we were more sensitive to sound. Or maybe she was lucky. I do not know. My mom and I both had trouble sleeping in those adjacent rooms. That is something I still remember clearly. It was not that we were awake every night because something dramatic happened. Most nights were probably normal. Most nights, there was nothing beyond the normal creaks and small animal sounds that any old house might have. But there was always a feeling that the rooms were not completely quiet, not completely empty. There was always the possibility that you would hear something at the wrong time. The house itself was not a horror movie house. It did not look abandoned or terrifying. It was simply an older home with half-timbered walls, thick carpet, rooms close together, and mice that lived in hidden spaces. That is what makes it difficult to explain why the incident bothered me so much. If I had seen a shadow figure or heard a voice, it would have been easy to call it a ghost story. But I did not. I saw an open door. I heard my mom yelling in her sleep, and she told me she dreamed someone touched her face with cold hands. Everything had a possible explanation. The door could have been opened by someone earlier and left that way. My mom could have sleepwalked, opened it, returned to bed, and forgotten. She could have had a vivid nightmare caused by stress, discomfort, or random dream logic. The cold hands could have been a sensation from the room temperature, the blanket brushing her face, or the feeling of her own skin while she slept. All of that is possible, but the timing made it hard to ignore. I came home at 2 in the morning. The door was fully open. I entered the room. My mom began shouting for someone not to touch her. Then she told me she had been dreaming about cold hands on her face. The whole thing happened within minutes. I still do not know whether the door opened before she started dreaming or after. I do not know if she had somehow opened it in her sleep. I do not know if the sound of the door moving had entered her dream and become the feeling of someone touching her. That would be a logical explanation, too. Maybe the door had creaked open because of some pressure I did not understand. Maybe the noise woke part of her mind, and her dream turned it into cold hands. Dreams can do that. A real sound can become part of a dream. A draft can feel like a person breathing. A blanket can become a hand. A noise can become a voice, but I knew that door. It did not move easily. The carpet made sure of that. You had to push it. You had to use force to get it past the thick carpet and open it all the way. That was why I could never forget seeing it wide open. It was not just slightly moved. It was not cracked enough for someone to peek through. It was fully open. Someone, or something, had made it happen. Years have passed, and I still think about that night sometimes. I think about coming home tired from a party and stepping into a dark, quiet house. I think about seeing my mum's door open wider than it should have been. I think about standing in the bedroom while she yelled at something I could not see. I think about the words she said after waking up. Cold hands. There is something especially unsettling about that phrase because it is so simple. Not claws, not a monster, not some dramatic nightmare creature, just hands. Cold hands touching her face while she slept. I do not know what happened in that room. I do not know if it was a dream, a sleepwalking moment, an old door, mice in the walls, or something none of us understood. Maybe the house was perfectly normal, and our minds gave meaning to ordinary nighttime sounds. Maybe the footsteps were never footsteps. Maybe the scratching was always just mice. Maybe the door had a simple mechanical reason for opening that I never figured out. But even now, I remember the fear I felt when I saw that open doorway. And I remember that my mum was not awake when I found her. She was asleep, dreaming of someone touching her face. And she had not opened the door. The broadcast is ending, but some voices do not disappear when the radio goes quiet. Maybe one of tonight's confessions will stay with you. Maybe you will remember it the next time your phone rings at an odd hour, or when you hear something outside after midnight. Leave a comment with the story that got under your skin the most. Subscribe to Dead Air Confessions for more stories from the people who called in after something went wrong.